Um, how have you
So it's
been?
been a minute.
I know. I
Been a
know.
minute since we recorded.
How have you been?
Yeah.
How was Jamaica?
Jamaica was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it
We had
everything
we had
you
a good
wanted it to
time.
be more?
Yes, I had a staff member at lunch last week because I came in from vacation that lasted through that Monday, the holiday. And then I worked Tuesday and Wednesday and then was off to our annual conference meeting. And at lunch Tuesday, one of the staff members said, are you glad to be home? And I was like, no. It was amazing. Like, you don't want to come home from that, like being waited on and babied and, you know,
What is
but
it
I
they call
am glad to be
your
back.
what is it what they call you when they give you your coffee in the morning?
Milady,
Yeah.
milady. They tend to call the men boss. All right, boss. And the ladies, milady. And Joseph said, that needs to become our pet names for each other. And I said, I'm gonna have to be honest, it's just not gonna be the same.
Yeah, it doesn't translate, and I don't know, calling your husband boss is a bad precedent.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Real talk, messy faith, a lot of grace. This is Untangling Faith Podcast with Tammy and Laura, and we are so glad that you're here.
Okay.
I don't know why we're talking about that because it's not cold out right now, but
It is not cold.
it's not
No,
cold
here in
at all.
Alabama, it's probably in the 70s
Yeah.
now. It'll get up in the low 80s today, I think was the forecast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So today we're talking about racism. And so maybe we should set a few ground rules because, with
Okay.
all the studying and um, all of the training and everything that I've been through in my life, and it's a lot. I think I decided to just not write down a plan and just wing it and just see where this
Okay.
conversation goes. But one of the things that I had thought about us talking about today was, oh shoot, it was really good. Um, First of all, why is racism a religious issue?
Hmm.
Um, it'll come to me. I guess it'll come to me.
It will. I was thinking like the the biblical foundations for why race does not create a hierarchy in God's kingdom.
Hmm.
And also, you've done a lot more work with anti-racism than
Yeah.
I have and been in that. And I think I noticed that when I began to do a little research about this, I found the term anti-racism in a lot of the United Methodist literature as well. But when you began to use that term, that was a new term to me
Mm.
there. So it may be a new term to some of our other folks.
Okay.
And what the difference might be between simply not trying not to be racist yourself and
Hmm.
like actively being anti-racist, like trying to create justice and equality and equity within the church.
Okay. Anti-racist versus not racist.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
And I think in acknowledging how deep some of the roots of stuff can be, and rather than denying the fact that we may still have some traces we need to be working on, acknowledging that they're there is the way we work on them, rather than trying to be in denial.
Okay. Um, I did a training this last year that was had a slightly different tone to it than other anti-racism training that I've done, and it really resonated with me. First of all, it was hilarious because I was sort of the regional leader at that event, and had been through a ton of anti-racism training, and apparently this white girl doesn't know as much as this white girl thought she knew. And our African American speaker, it was funny. I kept speaking up as if I knew something, and he kept putting me in my place. And I was like, okay, I need to back down a little bit and realize I still have a lot to learn. And that's, I think, I think that's an important place to be when you're talking about justice for a group that you're not a part of, is always recognizing that you're speaking from without their experience, from outside their experience, and that you can try to empathize, but you can't. Now, we can empathize with racism in areas because we've experienced gender discrimination and all of that kind of stuff. We work with issues where LGBTQ people in our midst are discriminated against, and so we're kind of like connected to that emotionally or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But we still don't know what it's like to walk through our country, our world, as a brown person or a Black person, or however they person of color, or whatever it is they choose to refer to themselves as. And so humility, I think, is another big part of this conversation.
And so I think today, as we're talking, because we're both white women in the United States, we can talk about our experience, and we can talk about the things that our brothers and sisters and siblings have shared with us. But I do think we've talked about, in the future, we will probably invite others to join us for other conversations about this, so that we can hear some direct experiences, and hopefully widen our understanding. This past Sunday in church, I talked to my congregation about the difference between unity and uniformity, and that unity doesn't mean that we're all the same. That's uniformity. Unity means we're united in heart and purpose. And in order for us to, and it doesn't mean denying our differences, it means acknowledging our differences and making room for all of those differences at the table. And so I think today we're talking about our experiences, but we need to listen deeply to the other experiences and have those impact us as well. I took a class in seminary, and I will confess that I registered for it simply because I needed a January class. But it was Black history, ministry, and theology. And
Okay.
it was one of the best classes that I had, but I got to hear things that I hadn't heard before. I knew that we here in the South in the United States are not as far along as some of the other areas of our country. I did not realize that we have other areas of our country that are struggling quite a bit too, that it exists in other areas as well. But also, I thought we were further along than we actually are. One of the examples was looking for parking spaces. Those of us who were in the program that I was in, we were distance students. So we were only on campus for 1 to 2 week intensives, 2 to 4 times a year, depending upon what classes we registered for. So we didn't have the primary parking stickers that the regular students did. We had a little temporary placard we would lay in our windshield.
Yeah.
And so we were looking for parking spaces, and some of the students in the class with me had security follow them through the parking lot and finally pull up beside them and ask, do you have business here? And ask to see their parking placard. I drove all over looking for the same parking space, and nobody paid any attention to me. So, and that was a seminary in Kentucky. And so we had very different experiences, and it would be very hard for me to say that that didn't have something to do with race. There was a reason the security paid more attention to them than they did to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we also had a conversation about what it is like to be on an elevator and have white women refuse to get on the elevator with you, or to be in a parking lot walking and have white women move way over to walk around them. And I did share with them that that would not have anything to do with them being because they're Black.
Male.
I'm not getting on an elevator alone with any man of any color. And if I am alone in a parking lot at night, I am moving away from the people that I see for my safety. That didn't happen. And so they went, okay, I hadn't thought about that. I said, I'm not saying it would never have to do with that. I'm just saying for me in those situations, it doesn't have to do with that. So sharing our stories and listening becomes important.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm pulling out. I found my anti-racism training manual, and there's about 100 and no 250 pages. We're not going to look at the whole thing, obviously, but I wanted to
Okay.
pull it. I was pulling out just some things that I might want to reference, particularly definitions,
Mhm.
as we go through some of these, because sometimes clergy can use words that people don't generally understand, or that if we're going to be talking about something, we need to make sure we're all using the same definition of a word, because depending on who you're talking to, what people's experience are, those words may mean different things to different people. And so I have some of that in case we need to clarify that. All right. Welcome,
Okay.
everybody. Welcome back to Untangling Faith. Today, we're untangling racism in the church and in our culture, our world. Why don't you introduce yourself first this time?
I'm Tammy Jackson. I am the senior pastor at Anniston First United Methodist Church in Anniston, Alabama.
And I am Laura Hutchinson. I'm the I'm the senior pastor of First Christian Church in Anniston, Alabama. That's the First Christian Church Disciples of Christ. So today we're talking about racism, and this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart for an awful lot of reasons. And so maybe Tammy, what we can do is start out and talk about why this is relevant for us. We're not just bleeding hearts. This isn't just something that we're like picking up another issue to talk about, but this is relevant for us in a variety of ways and for a variety of reasons. For me, in my case, first of all, I grew up in an inner city school in Atlanta, Georgia. The school was named Grady High School. I think it's now called Atlanta Central High School. Apparently, Grady in Atlanta is a Civil War hero or something. I don't know. So they've renamed that school. So I went to a high school that was named for someone who was a racist. That was great. But then I was also the extreme minority as far as race in my school. I think it was, every time I say the statistics, I have the feeling that they get bigger and bigger, but it was something like 80% African American, 20% everyone else, Hispanic, Asian, Caucasian, all of the above. And so I was just very used to being around people of color all the time. And in ninth grade or 10th grade, I moved to the suburbs where everyone was white. And it was so jarring that I didn't even understand what it was that I was noticing at first. I went home after the first day of school and I told my mom, I was like, I don't know why the lights are so much brighter in the hallways at this school, but it's like, I don't know. There's just something off about the light in the hallway. And it was the second day that I was there when I realized it's not the light, it's that everybody here is white. So our skin is reflecting like differently. Like that, like my subconscious picked up on it before my awareness came up. And so issues of racism suddenly started coming up in a way that I had not experienced until that point. Further, let's rewind or fast forward from there. My sister also moved to the suburbs with me, obviously, and it's pretty funny that she ended up marrying, and she didn't date him in high school or anything like that, but her high school locker partner from ninth grade on was Floyd, who is also African American. I'm going to guess he was like 2% of the student population, African American, and Molly married him. So, I mean, obviously we have a comfort zone in our family, right? Now, my niece and nephew are mixed race. This is so much bigger than just me. These are people I adore and love and who are family and will always be family, and so we're not just now talking about those people, we're talking about us and our family. And seeing how my sister feels at raising an African American daughter and son, and what that means to send them out into the world, and all of the stuff that she's dealing with that white parents generally never have to worry about. It's all interesting, but it's also very eye-opening. So that's one of the reasons why this is so personal to me.
So I grew up in small town Alabama. My parents were transferred to the Gadsden area when I was like 2. And the school that I went to did not have enough minority students in it for it to even pick up. It was listed as 100% white. I remember growing up with 2 Black families, and they lived on a particular street. And I came to understand that that road was considered unsafe. I came to understand that the reason county schools were better than city schools was because there were fewer Black children in those schools. And it bothered me, but it didn't really seem to have anything to do with me at that point. Faced it again when I got to college, and I began to make friends and notice which organizations welcomed and didn't welcome others, and began to hear people's comments about Black organizations, Black fraternities, and well, we can't have white ones. Why do they get to have Black ones? And I remember thinking, well, there's a reason we have women's organizations, because we need some encouragement and some empowerment that we're not getting in the other spaces. I can only imagine the same is true for them. Fast
So
forward later.
go back to when a lot of those organizations were founded. They were founded when those people weren't allowed into the white man's
Absolutely.
group. So they
Mhm.
had to form their own.
Mhm.
There's
So
historic.
fast forward, we decided to homeschool our children, and people gave us pushback about that. And some of the people gave us pushback because they're saying, like, what are you trying to avoid? And I said, my children are being exposed to a greater ethnic and religious diversity through our homeschool group than they would in the public school to which we are assigned. That wasn't our reason for homeschooling, but it was a pleasant benefit that came from it. And then we sold our house, the house my parents built, and moved into the house I grew up in, the house we have been living in and raising our children in. While we built and moved 2 blocks away, it sold to a Black family. And I had people in that neighborhood who lost their mind. We had a family come to us and offer us a significant amount of money if we would pull the house off the market and not sell it to them. And we refused because we had put the house on the market. We had begun to build a house. We had a number that we had been praying for. This is the number that we would like to get. And right at the right time, we got offered that number. And I thought, I think this is the hand of God. But our neighbors were not happy about it. And they said things like, well, when the Blacks start moving in, property values go down. You're killing the neighborhood. Let me tell you, they were better neighbors than we were there. So, and I think they still live there. I don't know. I've lost track now because I don't live in that city anymore, although we still have family there. But yeah, that was part of my experience. And then I had people in my ordination class, people I'm in ministry with. I see what's happening in our in the North Alabama Conference of the United Methodist Church. There are differences in the experiences that my Black colleagues are having. And now, for the first time ever in the North Alabama Conference, we have a Black bishop. And I was shocked by the comments that I got from people about, oh, yeah, United Methodism is going to die in North Alabama. Yeah, them sending a Black man is just that's the nail in the coffin. Why? Why is that exactly? And I've gotten to where that's what I do. I'm like, so why is that? Like, I'm gonna make you say it out loud. Like, open your mouth and let all the words spill out. Let me hear your racism. Put it out there. He's a fantastic bishop. He leads well. He preaches fantastically. He's got a wonderful sense of humor. I'm so excited about having him and working with him. And he happens to be Black. And
Right.
Yeah. So my experience is pretty limited and different. But I know my experience is that I know that what I've experienced has been different than many of my white male colleagues. And so I know that my experience is different than some of my Black colleagues because I'm white.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think why don't we start with scripture? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of biblical foundation for all the different ways of thinking about issues of race and
Okay.
especially minorities. If
Mhm.
we think about it in that way, if we want to think about a minority, and I think that in this case that has a significant um, role in
Mhm.
the power dynamic here. And right now it is what white people are still the majority of the population, and majority equals power. And uh,
But we know that majority doesn't always have to equal power. When we think about South Africa, it was a minority that maintained control.
right,
And there's also an awful lot of fear around this. And I've gotten to where I challenge people when they say, well, if the blacks take over, they'll be mean to us. What makes you think that?
yeah,
Is it because we've been mean to them and we're afraid they'll do the same thing to us? I mean, maybe you ought to check your conscience. I thought of one more piece that I want to put out here before we move on to the scripture. In the city where I grew up, and I did not realize this in all my growing up, I had graduated high school, graduated college, and actually moved back with my family. There was a middle school that was named General Nathan Bedford Forrest Middle School. And then there was a high school, Emma Sampson High School. General Nathan Bedford Forrest was the first Grand Dragon of the KKK. Emma Sampson was an Alabama girl who showed the Confederate troops a good place to cross the Coosa River so they could escape the pursuing Union troops. These were schools that served primarily Black populations in the city.
yeah,
And I remember when I didn't know that, we just called it Forest Middle School and Sampson High School. Realizing this, I wondered, what does it say to a Black family that you have to drive up to a school called General Nathan Bedford Forrest Middle School and drop your child off for compulsory attendance every day? It's like a constant reminder to stay in your place. We
mhm,
also have the statue of Emma Sansom that is at the end of Main Street. It's literally called Broad Street. And she's standing pointing with her finger, and people keep stealing her finger, and it drives people nuts. But it became an issue back in 2020 when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening so much. And there was a move to take that statue down, and people lost their minds. It wasn't put up during the Civil War or immediately after. That statue came up in the 20s with the Jim Crow laws. Um, and I am a person who believes the statues should be removed. They belong in museums. I don't
right,
want us to get rid of them. They belong in a museum so we never forget and we don't
yeah.
repeat it. But to
Walk through
keep them
history.
is to continue to say what was trying to be said. So
Yeah,
those were three other things that really impacted me and really made me think about the fact that as a person of faith, I needed to be active in opposing racism.
I want
So,
to point out too, by the way, that each one of those insights that you had because of empathy. So
yes,
go back and look at our episodes on empathy because I think
empathy is not a sin.
no, it is not. I think
Empathy is a Christian characteristic. It's
it
a
is
human characteristic.
the
Yeah.
I think the culmination of all the fruit of the spirit. Anyway, there was a scripture that was read by Chris Dorsey is excuse me, the head of our Disciples Home Missions organization here in the Christian church in the United States. Phenomenal, phenomenal speaker, leader, teacher, minister. Um, and he's African American. And so he came and he led us our anti-racism training this last year for clergy. Now, clergy in our region are required to have anti-racism training for in our region, which is the Alabama, Northwest Florida region, and Meridian, Mississippi. And I've been on the team for long enough where I've kind of seen that there's sort of a progression of philosophies and things that are taught and the way it's taught, and listening to different people respond to the training and stuff. And of course, it's always a controversial training. It's always uncomfortable. It's compulsory, like you said. You were forced to go. So there's a level of resentment, I think, on all the staff, whether they think they need it or not, right? So there are people who are like, I already know all this. And then there are the people who are like, I don't need to know this because this is biased or whatever, and whatever. And so there's always this level. And so it's slightly controversial people there, kind of like this. I don't really want to be here, but I'll be here because I need to check this box. So the trick is to try and create an experience that does help our clergy grow, but also maybe softens that resentment a little bit. So Chris was the answer to that for this year, because we just needed someone who could bring a new light to anti-racism, and he did. And one of the things that he did was he built us up towards this scripture, and it is the judgment of the nations from Matthew 25. And he based his whole philosophy of anti-racism on this text. And I'm going to read it. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. And the point that Chris made was that Christians are called to be for the least of these. And he says very often, most of the time when we read the scripture or hear the scripture, we hear the least of these as being the people who are at the lowest of society. But he said it's more than that. It is literally the fewest number in society. And he says, because one of the problems with our democratic system is that the majority rules, which means that the needs of the few get completely trampled. Christians are called to think beyond the needs of the many, which means, generally speaking, beyond your own needs. Because if you're, especially if you're a white Christian, you're in the majority in the United States. So you want to think past and beyond your own needs and your own desires, and think about the needs of the people in your midst who are not represented, who don't have a voice, who don't have the numbers to have that power to be able to just simply take what they need or what they want, and to think beyond and to become sacrificial in your thinking. And that is what anti-racist living is thinking beyond the needs of the majority and looking to the minority and thinking, okay, what do they need to be as successful as the rest of us, to be as healthy as the rest of us, to feel as worthy and respected as the rest of us, to be as seen as the rest of us. And I thought that was powerful. That was not heard anti-racism talked about in all the years that I've been doing it. And it was something that every Christian, I think, could connect with, no matter what your race is.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. because I believe there is a spiritual principle at work. Because one of the things that we say was Jesus as the fulfillment of Isaiah, that he came to set the captives free, to proclaim release for those who are oppressed. So I believe anytime a group is discriminated against, pressed, treated poorly, we're going to find that God is on the side of the one being mistreated. And so
Mhm.
when we mistreat people, we end up being the oppressor and we put ourselves opposed to God because we're oppressing people. It's one of the cautions that the people of Israel are given, especially when they wanted a king, was remember that you were oppressed in Egypt and you've now been set free. Don't become the oppressor. Don't do what was done to you. And yet that's exactly what happened with their kings, is their kings began to oppress them and to enslave portions of them, and they ended up contrary to God. But the idea that it literally, whoever is the minority is the one that needs to be looked after, and that is part of our evaluation of how we've lived. That I agree, that's pretty powerful to
Mhm.
think beyond ourselves. It's been one of the things that I've heard quite a bit when it comes to voting or operating or joining groups or like, but I have to vote in my best interest. And I believe that as a Christian, we have a responsibility to consider what's best for all, to think about the good of all, not just our own
Which
self-interest.
this was a major issue in this last election. I think that was the dividing line for where a lot of people voted. And then, in fact, I think it's probably a factor in every election.
Mhm.
But it was so strongly obvious this time, more so than I think it has been in the past. And that is, do you vote for the best interests of your family at the expense of your neighbor?
Mhm.
Because that's the choice we had to make in this election. I may not be Black. I may not be gay. I may not be a woman. I may not be an oppressed minority. And but my family is hungry, so therefore this particular leader is promising to put food in my grocery cart, and more money in my bank account. And so therefore, but he's also promising very, very explicitly to limit the rights of all of these other minority groups. And I saw so many good Christian people forget the call to care for the least of these and vote for the interest of their family. And from what I can tell so far in the last 100 or plus days is, I don't think that our economy is any better. There aren't more groceries in your cart, and you don't have more money in your cart. And now, by leaps and bounds, people are being oppressed at an exponential rate. So you thought you were helping your family, and you weren't.
And part of that stems from, we've heard more about that my first responsibility is to my family, and it's been framed as being a Christian teaching, that the Bible teaches that I'm responsible for my family first, and then only once I've taken care of my family for those beyond. And most of the Christian leaders have affirmed that that's not what the Bible teaches. We
Yeah.
are supposed to care for our families. The New Testament does say that the one who won't take care of their family is worse than an infidel. Like, you're supposed to take care of your own, but not just our own. Like, there's more. And so, to bring that back, because I chased a rabbit a little bit, it also includes those who are of other races and ethnic groups from us.
Right. Right. Um,
And let's remember that racism doesn't apply just to Black
right.
siblings of
No.
ours. I served in another area at one time where there was virtually no Black population, but there was a high Hispanic population.
Mhm.
And there were so many jokes and so many words and so many feelings. And it was everything that had happened around the Black population had simply been transferred to the Hispanic population.
Yeah.
And I was struck by the fact that, like, I don't think most of the people could see that that's what they were doing.
Yeah. So I know I'm going to butcher this, and if Chris ever watches this, first of all, I'd be honored. But second of all, he's going to be like, "That's not quite what I said," but that's okay. I'm trying. It's been a while since we had this meeting with him, and so, but I do remember that he spent a lot of time talking about living authentically and creating a space where everyone gets to live authentically. And so building a space so that everyone gets to live the way God calls them to live, and whatever that means. But I think it also means to live in an environment where people see one another for who they are, where they take the time to look into your eyes and to listen and to hear your story and to understand what it means for you to walk through this world. Because each and every one of us has a different story.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of us has different experiences. And depending on what group we happen to fall into, sometimes we have shared experiences or similar experiences to other groups of people, but they're still mine. Like mine are different from yours and all this kind of stuff. And so living authentically means allowing people to be themselves, and then trying to understand and to appreciate who they are on an intrinsic level. And so that goes so much deeper than just race.
Mm-hmm.
The way it's playing out in our country right now, it's race, or actually, I think in a big part right now, we're dealing with xenophobia. So we're talking about ethnicity and things like that. It's still an ism. It's still hatred. It's still oppression. It's still anti-Christian as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I can tell, the Bible is, and it's all relevant to this conversation in how we treat human beings, rather than trying to separate each other out into a hierarchy of value, rather than recognizing the spark, the image of God in every human being that we meet. I'm sure I missed a lot of important stuff.
Well, and I mean, if we can go all the way back to the very beginning, we can go back to the creation stories in Genesis. And in Genesis 1:27, maybe, where human beings are created in the image of God. And it doesn't say white human beings or brown human beings or black human beings. We were
Right.
all created in the image of God, which means that the image of God in us is something other than physical appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And I very often say to my congregation, you will never look into the eyes of another human being who was not also of sacred worth, who is not also made in the image of God. And I believe if we truly understood that, if we grasped it, if it sunk into our little brains, we would treat one another differently. When in Matthew 25, Jesus says, if you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And if you didn't do it for the least of these, you didn't do it for me. If we looked into the eyes of another person and saw Jesus in them and treated them the way we would treat Jesus, we would absolutely treat one another differently. And so for me, it reminds me that we are not yet the people of God that we are called to be. There is much to be done because we sort ourselves very much. And it's comfortable to be around people who are all like me. To bump up against another race, another ethnic group, another culture makes us uncomfortable. And the other tends to scare us.
Mm-hmm.
We get uncomfortable, we get scared, we don't want anything to do with it, we fear it. And other people prey on that. They take that and tell us there's a reason to be afraid.
Yes,
And
because
when we fall for it, we fall for that more than we do for the promises of God.
Because the more divided we are, the easier we are to control. And I don't think people see that. I don't think they understand that. If we have a fear of the other, then that can be capitalized on. If we have no fear, and was it First John says there is no fear in perfect love. There is no fear in perfect love, because fear has to do with punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no punishment in perfect love. And so we are called to that perfect love of God. And in that perfect love, there is nothing to fear. And I think fear is a big problem, or a big contributor to the racism conversation, and to the living out of racism, or any kind of ism of or oppression of people. It's the love of power. But the reason why the powerful are able to take the power is because the people give it to them, because the power,
Because we believe their rhetoric.
we believe that there's something to fear, and we believe that they can save us from that thing that we are afraid of. And so if we stopped fearing one another simply because we're different, and of course we're all different, and culture to culture we're different, and every individual to individual we're different, and so we try and lump ourselves together with other people who seem just like us, so that you can feel safe. It's a false sense of security, first of all. And second of all, we had nothing to fear in the first place, because we've got God. God is with us. God loves us perfectly and beautifully in all things. And God calls us to love one another. And when we love that person completely, we have no reason to fear them. And I know people can say, well, that's fine, but the statistics are that Black people, there's more violent crime and blah, blah, whatever, or, Arabs, or, pick a fear mongering group, or, or, Hispanics, or I just want to roll my eyes every time I hear a report about somebody who is an immigrant who commits a crime now, because they get pushed to the head of the line when it comes to reporting, because it just confirms the narrative that we have to fear immigrants, which also then makes it's a shame, because one of the things that happens in issues of racism is that one person ends up having to represent, or the entire race. Their actions represent the entire group. That does not happen with the group that's in power. In our case, it's white people. When a white person behaves badly, that's just a jerk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When an immigrant behaves badly, their behavior
It's
reflects
immigrants.
every immigrant. Exactly. When an African American behaves badly, they are then moved into the role of representing all African Americans. That's simply not fair. That's too much pressure to put on the individual, and it's not fair to the rest of the group either. Right now, I feel like white people should be getting a pretty bad rap, because there's an awful lot of rich white people out there behaving really badly. But it wouldn't make sense to put that on me, because I didn't do it. And yet that's really how we work, right? So anyway, yeah.
As we talk about scripture and how it speaks to these, I'm reminded that Jesus got asked a question, who is my neighbor?
Mm.
And his response was to tell a story, because Jesus was like that. He loved to let us figure it out and let it sink in over time. And he told the story of the Good Samaritan. And we hear it. I grew up, the story of the Good Samaritan. But it wasn't until seminary that the significance of the Samaritan really began to sink in for me. This was the other. These were people who used to be part of God's people, of the Hebrew people. There had been a split. They worshiped differently. They had a different culture. They were the other. They were the hated. Jesus makes the hero the people that they loved to discriminate against, to be racist toward, to exclude, to portray negatively. Jesus elevates them to the hero of the story and makes the religious officials the ones who don't have any kindness and empathy. He juxtaposes the expected so that we have to see people as people.
And in our context, the hero would be, I talk about this in my book. I've got a chapter on this, and on the significance of the Samaritan, why Jesus picked the Samaritan to be the hero. And there's he does another interesting thing in that text where the Samaritan could very easily have been the guy who was beat up.
Mm-hmm.
Could have made that guy was this could have been the Samaritan. It would have worked just fine if you said, okay, who was your neighbor? Well, the neighbor was the one that you had to stop and help. But what that also does is it keeps a Samaritan, or it keeps the least of these, in a position of less than. We're the hero. They're the poor, pitiful thing that we've got to scoop up out of the gutter and help, live decent lives. Instead, Jesus flips it. He makes the Samaritan the hero. The person in the gutter, I think, sort of becomes the listener. The listener is the person in the gutter. I think that we have a tendency to identify with that person, and then our religious elite, the people that we revere, who are, by the way, following the law. The reason they did what they did in the story is because it was the law. They are
following the rules.
Right. In order to approach,
they're being good religious people.
Jews. Exactly. They were supposed to, they should have been the hero in their common culture. Right. And so Jesus flips all of it. And so now, if we were telling this story today, if we were at a Democratic Party gathering, the Samaritan would be a person in a MAGA hat. If we were at an NRA gathering, the Samaritan would be Moms Against whatever. I can't remember, Moms Against Firearms or something like that. That's not the name of the group, but whatever. If it were an evangelical Christian group, the hero would be a drag queen, and the person in the gutter would be a child.
And I think that, I know it's intentional, but what if one of the lessons that we can learn from the story is that our salvation, not our eternal salvation, but our salvation from our racism and our errant ways of thinking, are to listen, to serve alongside of, to see the juxtaposition by those that we have othered, to see them as ourselves, to see that when it comes to the image of God, we are alike. We share more in common than we do different.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you. If the Samaritan had been the one beat up, that almost becomes an easier story, because look what a great person I am to have helped this person who needed it so badly. I even helped the Samaritan person. To me, it's not different than people who protest and say, but I have Black friends. Why you got to tell me that?
Yeah.
Why you got to tell me that? Because you want to make yourself sound better than you were. But to be helped by that person that you see that way ought to change and reframe the way you think about them.
Yeah. So
thank you so much for joining us today for part 1 of Untangling Racism. I'm really grateful you chose to spend this time with us, wrestling with hard questions, leaning into uncomfortable truths, and opening your heart to the radical love of Jesus. We're just getting started. I hope you'll come back next time for part 2, where we'll keep digging into what it means to see every person as made in the image of God and what that calls us to do as followers of Christ. If this conversation spoke to you, would you do us a favor and share this podcast with a friend? Maybe someone who's asking the same questions, or someone who's never heard the Good Samaritan story quite like this. You can also subscribe, leave a review, or tag us on social media. We would love to hear what's stirring up in you. Until next time, be brave, stay curious, and keep your eyes open for the image of God in every face you meet.